With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Come meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host Daniel Shop at C70. Adam, excuse me, Alan is still out. We got a lot of A's going around here now because Alan is still out. Hopefully we'll be back in the saddle next week. But this week we've got good friend of the pod, Alex Crisafulli. You know him from Alex Card 79. Alex, great to have you back on the show.
It is great to be here. As we were talking earlier, it's been a while, and as miserable as last season was, I do remember thinking that one fun thing, at least, was getting to come on here and talk to you. And what I think is fair to say now, your famous accent. I don't know if you listened to the most recent Cardinals off day pod, but you and your accent were promptly featured near the end.
I just got a chance. I mowed this afternoon and listened to that as I finished. And yeah, that was a very interesting last question that they that they took. And accents are one of those things that you never think you have, right? I mean, I definitely don't have the deep Southern drawl that would or anything of that nature. But I guess stack me up against a couple of Iowans, and maybe I do have a little bit of one.
So that's funny you say that because I was wondering as I was listening if people who have an accent know they have an accent. I've always assumed because I come from kind of a similar place as the two Bens. I come from Central Illinois, where I don't think, I'm sure there is some sort of accent, but it's certainly not one that's recognizable, I think, out in the wild, quite like an Arkansas accent or I don't know, Wisconsin or
Sure.
something like that. But you're telling me you do not recognize your accent.
No. I mean, because that's
Okay.
that's the people that we're with, and that's
Yeah,
that's
that
just
makes
what you're
sense.
used to. When you go to, you know, Washington D.C. or something like that, or you get some of that, even if it's not an accent, just some of that clipped way of talking or something like that. Even if it's not the Boston Chowder and the Wisconsin and then the deep Texas and then whatever they do in Louisiana because I don't know if anybody can understand that. But no, I don't think of it as that. But I guess if people are listening to this and if they say no, you idiot, you've had an accent this whole time, then I guess you can tweet at me and say how did you not know this? But yeah, and I will say that when I would go visit my um, wife's family in Ohio, they would often, like one of her aunts wanted me to talk as much as possible so they could listen to me, which seemed awful weird because anybody that's listening to this kind of show knows that it's the guests that you want to listen to, not me. But
Well,
anyway,
I don't know about that, but I do think I remember asking you one time about Billy Bob Thornton because he's from Arkansas.
right.
But I think you told me he was from a different part of Arkansas from where you come from. where the accent might be slightly different, or maybe I'm making up that conversation. I don't know.
I don't know if I know where Billy Bob is from, but it would be very
Okay,
believable because there are parts, if you get into southern Arkansas, you're getting down into the, Louisianas and all that stuff. You probably do have a little bit more of a southern accent. I would imagine, man, excuse me, I got a clogged up throat tonight. I would imagine that as things develop in the northwest part of the state where Walmart is and a lot of different cultures are being brought in there because of Walmart and everything like that, that accent up there may modify to be more of a regional one or maybe a little bit less of a southern one. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming, accents probably do modify over time too as people move in and move out.
sure.
Yeah. So, hey, this is also more interesting than what the Cardinals have been doing most
I was
of the
about to say,
time.
how long can we go without actually mentioning the Cardinals?
Well, probably should have gone a little bit longer, but we will say as we're recording this right now, Cardinals are up 4-3 against the Red Sox, and not only are they up 4-3, Alex, but they have 3 home runs. I will say, as nice as the 3 game winning streak this week was, which is probably an indication of how bad the season is when we talk about a 3 game winning streak like it was a big deal. But the 2 games against Anaheim that they won, it just felt like less that they won them and more that the Angels gave them the game, right? They didn't necessarily do a whole lot of things that were just so super. The Angels were just that bad. So it's nice to see them,
Yeah.
kind of taking matters into their own hands tonight.
Sure. And I have to be honest, I was battling a cold this week. I don't know if you can still sort of hear it. And because the games are in Anaheim and not starting until like
Mm-hmm.
9:40 my time, I did not see a minute of any of those games. I'll tell you, a coworker of mine who is also a Cardinals fan said to me between games 1 and 2, "Did you see that Angels lineup?" And I said, "No, I did not." He goes, "Just go look at the box score and look at that Angels lineup." And I did. And I was shocked at how how few names I recognized. Um, I know like the White Sox and I guess the Marlins are kind of leading the pack in terms of terrible teams, but on paper, that Angels team, while they have, without Mike Trout's name penciled in there, that looks like one of the worst teams in baseball, if not the worst team in baseball. And because of that, even uh, you never expect a sweep like the
Right.
best team playing the worst team. If you're a fan of the best team, you're like, all right, let's take 2 of 3 of this series, and move on to the next. Um, but that Angels team was so bad, and because the Cardinals had been playing so poorly, I was I was very disappointed when they could not complete that sweep, even though they had won the series, which is all you want them to do. But that's how bad that team looked, at least on paper. Like I said, I didn't see a single second of the series.
Yeah, I didn't I didn't watch a lot of it. I didn't watch any of it really, but followed along on game day and, read a few things. And, like I said, that 8 run inning, there was I'd have to look it up again, but some bases loaded walks and some errors that played into that. I mean, obviously Nolan Arenado homered to start that inning, but there's just it wasn't the offensive explosion that you would think for an 8 run game. And the last 2 runs of that game came in on an error by the Angels too. So
Well,
uh, go ahead.
Well, I think as you were alluding to when you asked me the question a second ago, they do have 3 home runs tonight, which
Yep.
is not something we are used to seeing with this team. So that's nice, at least. There was a big discussion between Chip and Jim earlier. I don't know if Jim Edmonds, I don't know if you had
Mm.
the sound on, where they were talking about atmospheric conditions and why the ball is traveling so much tonight. But regardless, it's probably an outlier because uh, we're 40 plus games deep this season, and we know this team does not hit for power. So it's probably an outlier, but still, it's nice to see for once.
Yeah. How much do you buy into that? Because we talk about it every year, right? That yeah, as the weather warms up, the balls are going to start flying. And I'm sure there's some scientific backing to that, but I also think that to some degree it's a little bit of wishful thinking at times, right? That we say that and um, it may not happen the way we want to. Because I mean, Bush Stadium, no matter what the weather, still plays as a pitcher's park.
Right. I'm not expecting this team to completely flip the script once, those St. Louis summers roll in.
Mm-hmm.
They just do not hit for power at all. I was looking at the numbers earlier this week, and they're not just like in the lower half. They are in like the bottom percentile. I think they were 28th in slugging or something like that. Which, as you can survive like that if you're getting on base at a super high clip and you have great pitching. Um, but you have to really excel at those other facets of the game, which this team clearly does not do. Like, I don't even know if this team would have their head much above water with like the 2015 pitching staff in
Mm.
terms of like the run prevention numbers they were able to cobble together. Um, I mean, obviously they'd be in much better shape than where they are now. Because I think the pitching, I'm curious what you think about this, because I think earlier in the season, the first couple of weeks, the narrative seemed to kind of be like, wow, this pitching is a pleasant surprise, meaning the starting pitching,
Right.
although the bullpen was getting accolades as well because the bullpen has been very good. Um, but lately, I feel as though the pitching has regressed to where a lot of people thought it would be. And now we have an injury and they're struggling to find a fifth starter. And the decent numbers that the pitching staff as a whole does have seems to almost be kind of propped up by the bullpen as the starters are kind of starting to, you know, sh- reveal who we thought they might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you do see all the numbers, like you say, in bottom percentiles of ERA and things like that we're seeing. And Sonny Gray has had two outings in a row that have been rough. I don't think we expect that to continue. Of course, I don't think we should expect him to have a sub one ERA like he did for the first, three or four starts either. But he's going to be better than what we've seen the last little bit. Kyle Gibson has
Mm-hmm.
still pitched well for the most part. We're seeing, he's given up 3 runs tonight in what are we in the fifth inning. So he'll probably he's starting to come back from what he had been, but he's still pretty solid. I think what surprised me more than anything, maybe it shouldn't, but the fact that Lance Lynn can't get past the fifth inning. Given the fact that the Cardinals talked about him being such an innings eater and a guy that really wants to go out there 6, 7 innings every time out, he just hasn't done that. I mean, he's throwing 100 pitches in 5 innings, and they're not necessarily great innings. And I think that's kind of we're starting to see the first couple outings for Lynn were all right, but I think we're starting to see more of what he was last year, which is frustrating. And then then Michaelis, I mean, Michaelis and Matz have kind of been what we thought they would be until Matz got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Occasional good starts followed by some really real clunkers. And then with Matz being hurt, and then all of a sudden Matthew Liberatore is having to stretch out on the big stage. And that's just I don't know. I mean, you went into the season knowing that the pitching staff was a little bit dicey, just on health wise, right? Because these are older pitchers. But you did think that maybe there would be arms that could come up. But between the fact that they haven't produced and the club just doesn't seem to want to go that way, it's put them in a real predicament, right? I mean, to have to kind of run a bullpen game here, this early in the season, 2 or 3 times in a row is a little bit frustrating. Is as good as the bullpen has been, you don't want to wear them out like that.
Yeah, and even those first couple stars from Lynn, I feel as though there were several Houdini acts he kind
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
pulled
Right. Right.
to really avoid some trouble. If I'm remembering correctly, his first start of the season, he got out of a bases loaded, no out jam
Mm-hmm.
in like the
Mm-hmm.
first or second inning, and
Yeah.
then went
First
on
one.
to yeah, okay, yeah, first inning. Then, if I recall, went on to pitch 5 or 6 innings that game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think the the point is like the stats on the periphery would tell you, like, is this going to be sustainable for 150, 175 innings across season? Probably not. And unfortunately, I sort of feel like that's what we're seeing now. What's tough with this team, and I think what has frustrated me about the Cardinals the last two seasons, and especially this year, because at least last year, I think I remember you kind of describing it as like the 100-year flood, as like
Sure.
almost like Murphy's Law type of year. Um, and okay, as much as we are all used to this team never having a losing season or not having a losing season for a very long time, that's not going to last forever. And, eventually you're going to have a season where everything goes wrong. And that was supposed to be last year.
Mhm.
What's frustrating about this year, and I was thinking about like some of those Cardinals teams post Pujols, like, they lost Pujols after the 2011 season, but they were still built to win. They lost Yadier Molina for a significant amount of time in 2014. And 2014, Yadier Molina was a very valuable presence. But they were still built, excuse me, to withstand that. Even having to bring in AJ Przinsky, who was, I mean, at the very end of his career, but they were still so solid everywhere else that they could withstand that. Same with Adam Wainwright in 2015, when I think, he pitched 25 innings before tearing his Achilles.
Mhm.
Um, but they were still built to be able to overcome that. Now it just feels like they are almost like crossing their fingers and hoping that if everything goes right, this could be a playoff team.
Right.
But never mind if everything goes wrong. Like, this is like, even if things just go okay, it feels like it's not a playoff team.
Right.
It's almost as if they were banking on hitting on all cylinders. And then if that happens, then they're in good shape. Now, to be fair, uh, I think it's reasonable for them to expect, and everyone to expect that, for them to not have expected a lot of the young guys to hit so poorly.
Mm.
As a lot of people have mentioned, like, Jordan Walker has not picked up where we hoped he would, and or where he left off at the end of last year. Brendan Donovan's been not great. Nolan Gorman, I I if there I'm curious if Fangraphs has done like a deep dive on what's wrong with Nolan Gorman. I feel like that should be an article that exists. I'd be surprised if it doesn't. I haven't read it yet, but I would like to. And there were several, very reputable publications who picked the Cardinals to win the NL Central. So maybe I'm not being quite fair to the organization in terms of like how they built the roster this year, but it certainly doesn't take like someone too intelligent to say like, yeah, if you have an injury to this pitching staff, things could get dicey. And that's sort of what we're seeing now. I just wish they were built to sort of withstand these sort of like peaks and valleys you always go through in a baseball season. I just don't feel like that's how they're built right now.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not real big on insurance. And and I think that's because I think that an organization, when Sonny Gray goes down in the spring, you have that opportunity then to get a Jordan Montgomery who's still out there. And I think a lot of teams like the Braves or the Dodgers or somebody like that would have done that, figuring that when Sonny Gray gets back, you're still going to have Jordan Montgomery and you're going to have a chance to find a place to make this work. And if they had done that, then you're not worrying about filling in with Matthew Liberatore here for Mats. Got your, you've got your starter. But they didn't go that way. And you know, and I don't know if this is factoring into the thinking of the club or not. But as bad as this year has been, as of right this moment, they are 2.5 games out of the wild card. And that's just, like I say, and I know that the Benz talked about that on their show as well, but a bit of an indictment of what the system is now, but also
Those were the exact words I was about to use. That is an indictment on the current playoff system. But
exactly,
good, yeah.
exactly. Because right now the Padres are 2 games under 500, and they've got that last spot, right? And that's just shouldn't happen. And I mean, granted, this is still we're still around that quarter mark. Things are going to not end this way. There's a, early on, but it doesn't feel like anybody in the National League outside of maybe the top four teams is going to just, put a lot of distance, right? I mean, the National League kind of feels like it's going to be this kind of blah little yuck, I guess, well, whatever it may be, on and nobody's going to really separate. And so I think that's, maybe that's, you also think that, look, okay, well, you know, not everything has to go right for us to be a playoff team. And, granted, they didn't expect everything to go this wrong. But it does feel like with with the way that the beginning of the season went, that they squandered whatever chance they had to build up anything, right? Because they wasted some good pitching that we may not see again. And I don't know how many 8 to 7 games they can win, even if these bats are coming around.
Yeah, it's amazing the Dodgers still associate with the rest of the National League sometimes. Although, I mean, the Phillies obviously are
Yeah.
looking like they could be a juggernaut, and I'm sure the Braves will be there too at the end of the year. But no, you're exactly right. I know Jordan Montgomery is not exactly tearing it up right now with Arizona, but he also got a very late start in terms of joining the club, and maybe this is a silly thing to say, but I feel confident that in this park, Busch Stadium, which we already talked about, it tends to lean heavily towards pitchers, that he would have done just fine as another starter um, with with the Cardinals, and they would have benefited greatly from that. I I will say one excuse me, one nice thing about Sonny Gray when he finally joined the club after the spring training injury. I had forgotten how nice it was to have a starter who was that in control that you just felt like, all right, if he's slated to pitch in a series, you almost feel like you just have to steal one of those other games and you're going to win the series. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I remember really having that feeling when like around 2013, 2014, Adam Wainwright, I feel like that's when he was at his best. And the pitching staff around him was a lot stronger than it is now. And so the, there's a reason why we won 97 games and then 90 games, I guess, respectively,
Right.
in those two seasons. But yeah, I almost had forgotten what it was like to have a pitcher who can really control the tempo of a game, because I feel like we haven't had that for a couple seasons. I'm sure there's someone I'm forgetting about, but and it's obviously very early, and the last two starts may be a sign that, like, maybe 2 months from now this is gonna sound like a silly thing to say, but the first couple starts are like, oh yes, here we go, finally, this is what we've been missing for a while.
Yeah. I mean, probably since second half 2019, right, with Jack Flaherty.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and that, even that,
And
you
that was like a
were
whole other level type stuff. But yeah,
right,
that would
but
be.
it was also, it didn't have that established track record behind it. You knew what Flaherty was supposed to be, but you hadn't necessarily seen it. So you didn't. It probably took. It was like halfway through that run when you started to think, oh, every time he went out, that he was just going to dominate. Early on in that, it was like, okay, he's thrown a couple good starts, but when's it going to come back to earth? Um, and then again, obviously, it didn't carry over to 2020. Of course, nothing carried over to 2020. That's not fair to say, but yeah, I think that is very very much of what we've seen with Sonny Gray, and I think that's why it was almost like, hey, that rain out against the Mets was like, oh, that works out well, because then he can go up against the Brewers, and you have a chance, and then for him to get lit up there was like, like, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to happen. But I do think, I mean, like I said, I don't think these last two games are indicative of what we're going to see out of Sonny Gray. Better not be, right? I mean, this is the biggest pitching contract the Cardinals have given out in a long time, if not ever. They're going to need him to produce, because otherwise, this is going to be I mean, they're going to really get into almost rebuild territory.
Yeah, I think he'll be fine. I'm not of all the things to worry about with this team. Sonny Gray is definitely towards
Well,
to um because it's the first time I've really had a chance to talk to you about this season. I'm curious what your thoughts were 3 to 4 weeks in because I okay, sorry, I thought Tyler O'Neill just hit a home run, but it was just to the warning track.
Uh,
I don't know, I don't know if you were watching that, but
I was not, but
um,
it's good to know. That'll
it
get
did
you
not.
to catch it in your throat for sure.
Yeah, it did not leave. He really wanted it too. You can tell.
Yeah.
It seemed as though after 3 or 4 weeks that the talk about this team was like, all right, they're not perfect. Um, the pitching, I mean, the hitting needs to improve, but it's not like last year.
Hmm.
Clearly, they're way better than they were last year.
Right.
Um, I don't think anyone really feels that way much anymore. Although there's still a good chance they're better than they were last year because they were really, really bad last year. But I think the signs were there, even those first couple of weeks, that this could crater. Because if I recall, I remember looking at some of the Cardinal stats, and yeah, they were hovering around 500, like either one game above or at 500 or one game under 500. It seemed like for several weeks until they went on that kind of extended losing streak. But even then, their run differential kind of told a story. And I don't know how much stock to put in run differential that early in the season, but I do remember thinking like, okay, they are managing to win some games, but I feel like they're really eking out some of these wins. And I'm
Yeah.
also there, and they seem to manage to lose some games 10-1. They aren't. I'm
Right.
not
Right.
turning on my TV like it's 2004 and watching them pound a team 7-0, like by the fourth inning or something like that. So I was very cautious in thinking like, wait, are these guys even decent? Like I feel like they might still be bad. And it's still very early. I mean, we're not even through the third. We haven't even seen a third of the season yet. So who knows? But I still think they might be very bad.
I mean, that's a very reasonable possibility. Um, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, I think early in the season is like, especially when the pitching staff was going well, you felt like, okay, well, that's different because especially at parts of last year, you turn on the game. So I like multiple games in a row where they'd be down like 2 or 3 runs in the first inning, and it's like this, it's just time to turn off. And they weren't doing that at least early on. Now they have had some games like that, especially in that 8 game losing streak. But you kind of felt like, okay, well, the hitting will come around eventually. And now, like you said, now that the hitting is starting to come around, I feel a little bit better about Paul Goldschmidt after the last week or so. Again, 3 home runs tonight is a nice thing. They did pretty well out in Anaheim again against the Angels, but you got to hit against somebody. Um, I think that maybe you start to think, okay, that's coming around, but the pitching staff, but you really going to get a chance where you have a real likelihood of it being like last year. Exactly, right? Terrible pitching, pretty decent offense, losing a lot of games. I guess maybe the big difference is Sonny Gray in the fact that you don't feel like you're going to go necessarily through the whole rotation. Although as I say that, we just had that 8 game losing streak, so maybe I should be quiet. But you don't feel like you're going to have extended losing streaks with a Sonny Gray going, which you didn't have last year. But I mean, that may be about the only difference.
Yeah. Because as you were saying that, I was trying to think. Wait, who was our like best pitcher last year? I mean, obviously it was Jordan Montgomery.
Right. While he was
But
there.
he was, yeah, he was gone by. What was he traded at the deadline? Or I feel like
Yeah,
it was
just a
like a
day or
week
two.
before. Okay, yeah,
Just a couple. They
okay,
didn't do a whole lot of trading until like the last 3 or 4 days of the
yeah.
thing. So
Um. So yeah, and it's certainly it's hard to imagine a team having bad pitching and being decent, and
mhm,
that's what we saw last year, right? And I think that may have been kind of the cause for a little more optimism at the beginning of this year, which is that like, okay, the offense isn't very good, but the pitching seems to at least be stable.
right.
And so as soon as that offense comes around, then this could be a decent club. because we have seen the opposite, right? Like where okay, the offense, this is not the greatest offense in the world, but this pitching is going to be enough to carry them to enough wins to be interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that was I certainly understand the optimism from that front. It just seemed suspiciously, even though they were bad in I guess different way, they've been bad in different ways this year with just this offense. It just seems suspiciously similar to last year in terms of like
Yeah.
just the listlessness and just how they were losing games, in terms of just every once in a while just getting destroyed, it seemed like, and not doing much the other way. So
And
I don't know.
and as you were talking, I started thinking about it, and it's not a way that we looked at it in the winter. Maybe it was. We should have. You think about a good offense and mediocre pitching. I mean, when I hear that, it made me think back to 98 and 99, right? McGuire's hitting 70 and 65, and the offense is clicking, but the pitching
Hmm.
staff so bad that, they're, a little bit over 500. I think both years they finished, maybe one year they finished under 500. I can't remember.
In
Um,
98, I want to say they won like 83, 84
yeah.
games. In
I mean,
99, they were under 500, I think.
I think you're right there. Neither time were they really in a hunt. Now, granted, things are a little bit different now with wild cards and stuff like that, but still, you know, that's kind of the way the team was constructed back then. And I don't know. I mean, again, we didn't look at it that way this winter, but maybe we should have. And again, we haven't seen that offense, but that maybe the. I mean, is that almost like the best case scenario for the summer? Is Um, you know, Gorman finds his stroke, and Goldie and Arnaudo are hitting, and they're losing, 8-7 or something like that. I
Well,
don't know.
well, I was thinking because we've heard a lot of people say about this team, like, not only are they bad, but they're not even fun to watch. And so I
Hmm.
started thinking, like, well, what is an example of a team that is bad, or not competitive, but fun to watch? And I think you just hit on it. The 98 team.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they were, like I said, they were a little above 500, but they weren't really in contention. I think maybe there was a point in August where they were a couple games away from the Cubs, or the Cubs. Wait, the Cubs are the wild card that year, right? Yeah.
Uh,
Well, they were a couple games away from
yeah.
something. I don't know. But for the most part, like you said, they were not, um, really in contention or serious contention, but they were so much fun. Now, granted, they also had a guy hitting 70 home runs and chasing, and ultimately breaking the most famous record in sports. So that at the time, so that may have
Yeah.
had something to do with it.
It added to it.
But
Yes.
I think the point stands that that is what a bad fun team looks like.
Yeah. I think that. I mean, it's very rare that you have a bad. Oh, there's another home run from Mason Wynn. Man, this is that. It is
Oh,
our night.
you
Um,
you are ahead of me, Daniel.
I'm
I
just
have
watching
him
game, and I'm just watching game day. I don't have the
Okay,
video,
I
but
have him on a 1-2 count, and let's see.
okay.
Here comes the pitch, and there it goes. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, like that.
Good for
Gotta
Mason
like
Wynn.
that. Um,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult to have a bad team that pitches well but doesn't hit, right? Because you may not be great, but you're still probably going to win a number of games just because you're. And but a bad team that hits is fun to watch because everybody likes offense. Everybody likes to see, if you can't get wins, then at least get some offense, right? I think that's kind of the baseball fan mantra. And if you're not getting either one, that's when people don't show up to the ballpark.
Right. No, that's exactly right. I would have to go look at the stats, but it wouldn't surprise me if the 2017 kind of um,
Yeah,
fit that
probably. I
definition
mean,
as well.
losing Carpenter that year was the biggest blow probably
Yeah.
to that team, because then you just didn't have the pitching. Wainwright still just getting getting his feet wet as a starter, and boy, I don't remember who else was on that team. But
I was just trying to
yeah,
think of who.
Yeah, because
I believe we had Weaver back for another season, and he
did
was
we? I
not
didn't
good.
think Weaver came back.
I
I
thought
thought he
he
went off to
did
the
because
Yankees
I
or off
remember
to.
thinking, you might be right. I thought I remember thinking like, I'm so glad you pitched so well in the World Series last year because you're really bothering me right now. Um,
I had a feeling in my
you
head
know
like,
what?
go ahead.
I think you are correct. He went to the Mariners
Yeah, I just pulled
in
that up. He went to
2007. Okay.
because I had that feeling like you did so well for. Of course, granted, looking at his numbers, he had a 5.18 ERA for the Cardinals, so it's not like he did that well for the Cardinals. He just had a pretty good
Oh,
couple of
I'm
games in
putting
the
it all
postseason.
on that one. I'm putting it all on Game 5
Sure,
of the
absolutely. I mean,
2006
and no,
World Series.
everybody did, right?
That's
Everybody did.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I
That's
remember thinking you had so much success here. Why didn't you stay? And he didn't. He went to Seattle and went 7-13. So probably a good thing he didn't
with
stay very
a,
long.
6.2 ERA
Yeah,
over 150 innings. Yeah,
yeah,
that was a tough year
tough one.
for Jeff,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
I still like him.
Hey, nobody's going to complain about anybody that gets a significant playing time in a World Series team, right? I mean, you've always got a standing reservation back in St. Louis.
Yeah, I mean,
Most of the way.
I feel the same way about Anthony Reyes.
Sure. Who's too busy fighting fires nowadays, but
Oh, that's right. I forgot that.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
correct.
he's
Yeah,
a
that's right.
fireman out in California, isn't he? I think that's right. So
Right. Yeah.
it's fascinating. It's really
Cool
interesting
story.
to uh, to hear about players that had some success in the major leagues, but then they go off and then all of a sudden they have this other career. I mean, that happened quite a bit in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, because the money wasn't there.
Hmm.
But nowadays, to hear of a player that goes back to school and has a totally different career, just doesn't seem to happen very often. It's pretty cool to hear it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it especially does not seem to happen with baseball players as much. Like, it's not uncommon for to hear about or I guess it's a little more common to hear about a football player, basketball player goes back and gets his degree or something like
Yeah.
that, and then I don't know, all of a sudden he's selling insurance or something like that. But you're right, I don't hear those same stories about baseball players.
Yeah, I'm trying to look and see who was on that team that 2007 team that kind of stands out. Um, Randy Flores was on that team, but in the bullpen.
Okay.
A lot of the bullpen seemed to be the same. Oh, yeah, Braden Looper. I'm not sure if that was one of his starting years or not. Probably.
Okay.
Let's see. I've got the batting numbers there. I don't need that, but oh well. Mark Mulder was over there, but it's still there. You had it's
So,
the Mike Maroth era. Um, Joel
w-
Pinero,
w-
yeah, Joel Pinero was in there. He was pretty good for him.
Jason Marquis was long gone by then, right?
Yeah, because he went in the Wainwright trade. So, um, and you had Wainwright in that rotation. So yeah, he was gone after
Well,
04.
Marquis was in the Wainwright trade. How did I not know that? Or
No,
remember
Marquet
that?
came over in the Marquet. I'm thinking about it. He was in the trade, but he came to St. Louis then. But I think that was now that I think about it, that was probably the first year without him
You're right.
because he was
He went to the Cubs that year.
yeah, because he was around for the World Series
Yeah, yeah.
team. So um, yeah, as we wander down other bad teams, so we don't have to
Well,
talk about this one.
while we're talking about older players,
Sure, that's what we do. We're old guys. We have to talk
yeah,
about old
yeah,
players.
yeah. We're old, so we can talk about other old people. The latest pebble hunting by Sam Miller, I think it was his most recent one, was about Eli De La Cruz and his him being on pace to steal almost 100 bases so far. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's like now on pace to like 99. They were talking about this on the Off Day podcast. But one thing in the article that really stuck out to me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Sam Miller mentioned that De La Cruz is slower from first to second than Vince Coleman was. Now, not not much slower. Like it may have been something as small as like a tenth of a second slower than Vince Coleman from first to second. Um, and my first instinct was like, well, yeah, of course, Vince Coleman was super fast. But then I started thinking that was almost 40 years ago. You know, and these guys have
Yeah.
gotten bigger, stronger, faster. Um, and it kind of blew my mind that Vince Coleman, that's how fast Vince Coleman was. He was so fast. He was faster than the fastest guy nearly 40 years later.
But,
Now, I don't know if I think actually Victor Scott, right, was clocked
yeah.
at having the fastest sprint speed in the league, although he's no longer in the league. Um,
Mhm.
but I can't imagine De La Cruz is anywhere but in that top 99th percentile. Um, so, th- one, it made me happy for Vince Coleman. Like, yeah, I'm, again, another nice reminder that you are ungodly fast. Um, but does that surprise you, or does that sound right? Because it
In
sounds
some
like.
regard,
Go ahead. Sorry.
well, in some regards, like I said, I understand what you're saying, right? They are bigger and stronger, and they are, they train more and all that kind of stuff. But speed isn't one of the things that they necessarily train for as much. I don't feel like, right? I mean, they work on it. There's no doubt about it. But
Mhm.
being that they have, usually are bigger and strong. I mean, you look at all these guys. I mean, you look at the guys from the '80s, and they look like, they look like accountants, and I can say that.
They
They're
look
just
like
they're
what?
just accountants.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so I mean, they look like the guy that you could just see walking down the street. If you saw a major league
Like,
baseball player walking down the
are you
street
saying Bob
now,
Horner didn't look like a natural
okay,
athlete to you?
for maybe well, Bob Horner may not have looked like an athlete, but he looked bigger than an accountant. I will give you that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, they
Yeah.
did seem to be built differently. I mean, you look back at old baseball cards, and I know you do, and it strikes me how, for the maybe a weirder word to say, but normal that those players look like, right? I mean, they look like people you would know to some degree. Not all of them, but there's a lot of them. And so I do wonder if it's just, the bulk that some of these guys have and the training that they don't ever do. But, and I don't know. I mean, you're looking at sprint speed, so you're probably not judging it by how, that's not talking about, the jumps they get and things of that nature. So, I mean, yeah, I
And
mean,
to be clear, this was strictly measuring not sprint speed, but just from first to second.
just a first and second.
Yeah, so that takes into other things into account, like,
Yeah.
and he mentioned this. I think Vince Coleman actually would start his slide later than than De La Cruz, because that's kind of how they were taught back then. But now
Hmm.
they slide a little earlier to it's better for injuries and things like that. You're not kind of going into the base as hard as they were back then. So that, I'm sure that would have something to do with it. Um,
Yeah.
but
And
still,
yeah, not the collision rules at second being different, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it does say a lot for Ellie De La Cruz that he's up in that echelon. But I think about, Vince Coleman was ridiculously fast, right? He stole a whole lot of bases, but it wasn't like he was the only burner, right? I mean, Ozzie could run, Lonnie Smith could run. You had Tim Raines in the league. You had Ricky Henderson. You had all these guys
oh
that,
yeah,
not only did they know how to steal, I mean, that was part of it, but they had speed. And so I think that's what stands out right the most is De La Cruz probably has such a significant lead over, the next people, or at least the average player, versus what Coleman did back in that '80s era. Um, I mean, so many things are different in AstroTurf and all that stuff, and how the game is played. But I just wonder if you compared Vince Coleman to the average player, if De La Cruz to the average would not be a bigger delta.
that's a good point. And another thing that really stuck out after reading this, I kind of did a bit of a, not a dive on Vince Coleman, because I feel like I know enough about Vince Coleman already that it doesn't necessarily constitute a dive. It was more just a
Hmm.
hey, I'm
refresher?
going to go remind myself of Vince Coleman
Hmm.
stats. And in 1987, no, I'm sorry, 1986, Vince Coleman stole 107 bases with a 301 on base percentage. uh, I, just out of curiosity, I looked at the National League average that year, and this included pitchers, by the way. So
Hmm.
I did not look at just position players, but the National League average with pitchers was 322. Tim Raines, who stole 70 bases that year, had a 413 on base percentage. So
Yeah.
just imagine how many bases Vince Coleman could have stolen if he had just had like split the difference between him and Tim Raines in terms of on base. If he had like an
Yeah.
OBP of, I don't know, 355, he may have stole 125 bases.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he would have. That is, yeah, that's kind of
If not
crazy
more.
to think about. I mean, it just very remarkable. And I knew that too. I mean, it's one of the things that when Coleman came up for Cardinal Hall of Fame consideration, not that obviously that Coleman is going to get there at some point in time, but I felt like, except for stolen bases, his stats didn't necessarily warrant a lot of that, and it warranted at a spot where there were some other people that probably might have should have gone in before him. Um, but there's no doubt that he has the cachet that some others don't because of the speed and being on those World Series winners or World Series runner ups, and that has captured imagination. And there's a lot to that, especially when you're voting on what basically is to some degree a popularity contest that's going to carry a lot.
Yeah, he's almost similar to like a Devin Hester type,
Hmm.
um, in terms of like he was the very best at this one thing. Now I'm sure some Ricky Henderson fans might argue with me on that, but at least for a short period of time, he was the very best at like this one thing. And the fact that he kind of personified like at least what a lot of people thought Whitey Ball was about. But he was such a exciting and different player that I never had any problem with him going into the Cardinals Hall of Fame, even if it was well ahead of plenty of players who had a higher WAR while playing with the Cardinals or whatever. Just because, yeah, it's Vince Coleman. Put him
Yeah,
in.
and that's fair, and that's fair. I mean, and again, it's not it really isn't ever going to be a logic based business, right? To get these people. And speaking of, we might as well talk about the fact the Cardinals announced their newest inductees to the Cardinal
Yeah.
Hall of Fame tonight, and I think it was interesting how they went about it this year. They cut the ballot down to four, and they didn't put anybody new on there. Which I mean, there wasn't really anybody necessarily new that stood out to go on it, but they cut it down, and I felt like they really wanted to get some of the one of these guys to get in there. And so Matt Morris goes in as the fan vote, and I'm fine with that. I remember Matty Moe pretty fondly, and I think
Mhm.
he played at a time where the Cardinals weren't all that successful, and I think much like you know people like Ted Simmons or others that played in the '70s that didn't get to play on the big stage, they sometimes get overlooked.
Well, he also, though, overlaps entirely with that 2000-2005 run.
Yeah.
So he was on some very good teams. And I would almost say he was the first guy. I remember thinking this in 2001. He felt like the first closest thing we had to an ace since maybe John Tudor. Is am I forgetting someone?
Well, that's interesting you say that, and maybe that's true. But in 2000 and then of course for part of 2001 is when Daryl Kyle's there, and I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
if
That's
it depends on how you would look at that, and I'd have to look at the numbers to see. But in my memory, he was at least the number one starter. Whether that's the ace or not, that I guess that's up to your opinion.
yeah. No, that's
and again stresses, I think, back to our point earlier, like you are allowed to have both Sonny Gray and Jordan Montgomery, just like back then.
Exactly.
You were allowed to have both Matt Morris and Daryl Kyle. It actually helped,
Yeah.
and the record of the team in 2000 and 2001 kind of showed that. So yeah, I'm trying to remember, but I think 2001 Matt Morris was really really good. I think kind of reached heights that maybe Daryl Kyle never quite hit
I'm trying to remember because
with
I
the
feel like
Cardinals.
I have to look. I felt like that. I mean, he was the All-Star representative in '01. Matt Morris was, but I'd have to look at his second half. For some reason, I had a feeling that he struggled after Kyle's death. Um, at least the idea that it kind of weighed on him. Um, but they also won a lot of games after that, so he had to have been pitching pretty well. So you're probably right. Um, and he did.
Well,
Also, that 2000 team also had Rick Ankiel on it, so there was a lot of pitching on that team.
yeah, that
Um,
is true.
but
You know, Matt Morris is always an interesting candidate. I have very fond memories of Matt Morris for a lot of the reasons I just said. I think what sort of held him back is he doesn't have a definitive postseason moment, or at least one that I can
right,
really remember. Um, I don't remember. I remember him being quite pedestrian in the postseason, which that that happens to a lot of good pitchers. You're playing good teams, small samples. That says nothing about his overall body of work. And it was kind of like I guess a flash in the pan of when he was really really good. It was like that 2001 2002 season, um, and then yeah he kind of faded a little bit. But he still, I think sometimes I have to remind myself that he was even not only on the 2014 but through 200 plus innings, and it was
yeah,
on the 2005 team as well. It's funny because I never think about Matt Morris when I think about those teams. I think about Albert Pujols. I think about Chris Carpenter. Um,
hmm
I think about those guys. But yeah, I forget that Matt Morris, who's kind of like almost kind of bridged the gap because he played with McGuire. He was
yeah,
on the '98 team.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, he was around for a lot of and was a important player for a lot of good teams and big moments in Cardinals history. So yeah, that was nice to see him get in there. I feel like he's kind of been forgotten.
Somewhat. Looking at the number, yeah, he was rookie of the year. He was rookie of the year runner up in '97, and then yeah, you're right. In '01, he was third in the Cy Young voting. Got some MVP votes. Won 22 games. That was really his best year. And he started to tail off there the last couple of years in St. Louis, but '04 and '05, you're right. I mean, by that time you've got Carpenter and you've got the MB3 and you've got a lot of other things that are going on, and he didn't have the longest of careers either. I mean, he was out of
Mhm.
his last year. It was when he was 33. So I think that yeah, he did get a little bit overshadowed by some other guys. Of course, it's difficult to stand out when Albert Pujols is on your team. So there is that.
For
But yeah,
sure.
I was glad to see him get in. Also, the Red Ribbon Committee took in Whitey Krowski, so continue to add to the third basemen that are in the hall, and Dave Duncan got selected to go in, and I think it's really cool because you don't necessarily go with coaches very often, but there's no doubt that Dave Duncan was a huge part of the Cardinals while Tony Russo was here.
Absolutely. And when I think about LaRussa, I think almost immediately of Duncan and even McKay to a lesser extent, but just the fact that
hmm
they were kind of like a trio for so long. And you know, I kind of have complicated feelings about LaRussa sometimes. I have no doubt in my mind that he was a great coach, a great manager. Maybe the best that I've seen in my lifetime in terms of his whole body of work. But just in terms of like, yeah, he also might be kind of a jerk. But one thing
I
I
think it's
caught,
possible.
One thing that I thought always spoke very well of LaRussa was the fact that he had these guys with him for so long. I mean, Duncan wasn't just with him in Oakland; he was with him in Chicago as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it really says something, I think, sometimes about someone when you're not just cycling through a bunch of coaches and people who are working for you. That when you have someone who is by your side for that long, I think that does say something about you. And Dave Duncan, um, one, I always thought it was cool that he was a pitching coach, even though he was a catcher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how common that is. Uh,
Can't be very often.
maybe it's more common than I realized, but I haven't heard of many others, and I always thought that was so interesting. And it was his immediate coaching job, if I recall. Like he immediately went from being a catcher to a pitching coach. Someone can correct me if I'm
Oh,
wrong on that, which to me says something about someone's knowledge of the game that they are able to do that. And two, the results he had were just undeniable. That they would be able to take a decent pitcher like Woody Williams,
mhm.
and I don't know why, but Woody Williams is always like when I think of Dave Duncan, like a Dave Duncan type pitcher. Woody Williams is like the the person that pops up in my head.
That's fair.
Um, but but just he was able to take these like pitch to contact guys, get that ball low in the zone, and get great results from them. And even I was kind of frustrated sometimes that we didn't have more swing and miss guys. And this was even back
Mhm.
when it wasn't as, not everyone had as many swing and miss guys as we have today. But even back then, it seemed like the Cardinals had less than other clubs. And I'd be like, gosh, can we at least just get one guy who just like mows people down? Um, but that said, yeah, like I'm trying to think of something that would compare what they were able to do with some of these Cardinals pitching staffs, and like they had such kind of like a character that it was really kind of fun to cheer for in a way.
Yeah, because you knew that journeyman was coming in, and he was going to have the best year of his career. I mean, it was going to be the Jeff Weaver, it was going to be the Joel Pinero that came in. I mean, if the Cardinals had signed Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson with Dave in the Dave Duncan era, nobody would have batted an eye. I don't think. I think they would have expected a huge year from both of those guys because of what Dave Duncan did. Um, Again, game is different. You're right. The swing and miss is much more important than it was, and the defenses are different and all that. But I think that's the case. It was. I mean, you just knew that it didn't matter who they picked. If he couldn't fix somebody, when Mike Maroth came over from the Tigers, and we to pull the name that we were just talking about, and he continued to bomb, I think everybody was kind of surprised, right? Because that's just not what happened. Dave Duncan, you listen to Dave Duncan, you threw ground balls into the dirt and you let somebody pick him up, and you were going to be fine. And that didn't happen with him, for whatever reason, whether he just couldn't do it or it just didn't work. I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty shocking when things didn't pan out because he was so successful.
I will also kind of always wonder what would have happened because if you recall, after Larusa retired, he actually signed a contract to stay on as pitching coach, presumably under Matheny. But then his wife got sick, and
Well, that's
that's when
right.
he
That's
stepped
right.
away. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know if things would have been much different, but I certainly don't think it would have hurt Matheny to have a presence like that by his side in those first couple seasons.
It's hard to think of things that would have hurt Matheny. Um, but but yeah, I mean, it definitely would have been a good thing to have. I mean, and it would have been very interesting to have a catcher as a manager and a catcher as a pitching coach and all that. But yeah, I think you're right. It would have been helpful. And I don't know that Duncan would have stuck around for much more than a year anyway. I have a feeling that it would have been difficult
Yeah,
for him to work with anybody that wasn't Larusa, just because you have that shorthand. You don't
for
even have to
sure.
say it, right? You look at them and it's like, okay, yeah, it's time to go get that guy or whatever the case may be, and to try to build that back up might not have worked, but anyway, I'm glad that and Duncan's have gone through so much in
Hmm.
his life, right? Well, you said his wife passing, and of course Chris passing as well with cancer. Um, it's nice that they were able to do this.
I've always loved that story. I think Larusa told it when he was giving his Hall of Fame speech when they were in Oakland. Dave Stewart was getting knocked around, and they both went out to the mound. Do you know what story I'm about to tell?
No, I don't, but I just know what I know the reputation of Dave Stewart. So I'm really
Yeah.
interested to hear where this goes.
Well, I guess Dave Stewart was getting knocked around, and they both went out to the mound, like meeting Duncan and Larusa, and talking to him, and basically saying like, "Yeah, we've seen enough." And Dave Stewart was arguing, saying, "I'm not even tired." And I guess Duncan said, "Yeah, but the outfielders are," or something to that effect.
Yeah,
The fielders are
yeah,
tired of running and chasing all the balls that you're, the hard hit balls that you're allowing to the gap, or but no, I was very happy for Dave Duncan. That's I would say long overdue, actually.
yeah, yeah. And that
I,
was something that had to be done by the committee or the owners or something. Well, it wasn't ever going to work as a fan ballot, but it definitely needed to be done.
he also, when Whitey Herzog passed a few weeks ago,
Hmm.
a lot of people commented how he just looked like someone out of central casting for the job that he had. I always kind
Yeah,
of felt that same way about Dave Duncan, just that sort of same look he always had on his face, almost always kind of like a slightly perturbed look, even though I don't think he necessarily
yeah,
was.
yeah.
But also a look of like almost as if he was studying what was happening, and like he just always seemed very down to business.
Well, and I mean, I know he and Larousse, and I think he had a pretty good part of it. I'd have to go back and read the books like Men at Work because I always reference that when we're talking.
Hmm.
But the fact that they made those binders and kept track of where everybody hit stuff and all the stuff we take for granted now, right? We always know spray charts and all that kind of stuff. We know all that, but they were kind of one of the first ones to start that, and Duncan was part of that. Knowing charting where the pitches, what pitchers were thrown, and what happened to them, and all that kind of stuff. And just being on that cutting edge of stuff that became just vital even 10 years later.
Yeah, and it also kind of makes me miss the days when there were these sort of strong personalities in the
Yeah,
dugout. We hear a lot that like the manager now is just sort of you know, almost like almost like the middleman between like the
right.
front office and the buttons to be pushed on the field. Um, that might be overblown a bit. Um, but I do kind of miss the days where there was a lot of I think some more characters I would say in
Right.
the dugout, even if
Yeah.
some of these quote unquote characters like Larusa didn't always seem like the nicest guys in the world.
It was a little bit a harder time back then, I think. Yeah, and yeah, you're right. I mean, no, managers are kind of interchangeable now. I guess Craig Counsell probably has the most cachet of any manager that's actually you know managing now. Now that you've
Yeah, I
seen
mean,
Baker go and other things like that, and Fracona go, there's not anybody else out there that's not one of these kind of doing the whims of the front office.
I mean, Dave Roberts has basically, I mean, he hasn't, excuse me, he hasn't been there for the entire Dodgers run. Mattingly was the manager for a few of those seasons, if I recall. But
Yeah.
even Dave Roberts kind of has just the rep of like, and I don't know how fair this is, but just as someone who's like, yeah, he's an extension of the front office.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I mean, you don't see of a manager with a signature move anymore, right? I mean, you don't have Larusa batting the pitcher eighth, or the development of the bullpen, things of that nature. You don't have Sparky Anderson coming out with Captain Hook moniker of pulling pitchers constantly. You just don't have that. You don't have Whitey Ball. You don't have things like that. And it's part of the game. The game has evolved. The game has gotten smarter and gotten more. There's more data. There's more all this stuff. But I do feel I think it's fair to say, I don't think it's old man shouts at cloud to say that it has lost some character. Now, maybe we're seeing a little bit more of that with the players. That now you get to see the players as human beings instead of kind of these just pieces on a board. Um, but overall, I think baseball has lost a little bit of its character.
Oh, I think that's definitely fair to say. Anytime something becomes more homogenized, where everyone's, as you said, reading the exact same data and basically operates the same way, there aren't really front offices that have the reputation of just being like dumb anymore, or like I'm trying
Eh,
to think
Colorado,
some of the
maybe.
yeah. But there aren't many like if you think of some of the trades the Cardinals were able to pull off, or some other teams they
Oh
were able to
yeah.
pull off, 10, 15 years ago, that probably would not happen today.
There's no way that Jim Edmonds trade gets made, right? Because that whole trade was made because Bottenfield won 16 games the year before. Nobody's looking at that anymore.
No,
Nobody's going to buy
no.
on a 1 year thing and sell off a guy that maybe you're not happy with, but is still a hall of all star center fielder. That didn't. I say that it should not. It probably would not happen today, even with the worst of front offices.
Oh, I mean, yeah, there was like Jim Edmonds was kind of deemed as like a brat in Anaheim,
Hmm.
if I recall, but we're still talking about a position player who was on the right side of, well, I guess, how old was he when I moved? Okay, I'm looking at it right now. He actually was 30 when he joined the Cardinals, which is shocking.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys who had a very good career between ages 30 and 37, which doesn't always happen. Um, so he was a little older than I realized, but still, Ken Botfield wasn't that young
No,
either.
he was not a
And
prospect of any sort.
no, not at all. And Jim Edmonds had proven to be a very valuable position player. I mean, he had a stretch with Anaheim from '95 to '98 where he was one of the better players in the American League.
Yeah.
So yeah, that you're right. That trade probably does not happen in
No.
today's baseball.
I mean, you're going to have, I mean, now you would have him sold off for some sort of prospect part that might not ever do anything. That
Yeah.
happens, but not buying on a career year type of thing. So,
Oh yeah, like lopsided trades like the Alcantara, Marcelo Zuna trade that can still happen
mhm,
because we're talking about prospects, but
right.
and sometimes you just never know. So that's a bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you saw, I saw it a little bit before we started recording, but it looks like there's been a leak of the City Connect jerseys. Did
I
you get a
saw
chance to
them.
see that? So,
I did.
what's your first impression? I mean, from what we can tell from a picture, what do you think?
Well, I'm gonna stay on brand. When you and when I join you on Meet Me at Musial, we often say, "Here are the two old guys yelling at clouds," as you just said. And I hate City Connect jerseys. Um, I I hate them in the NBA. I hate. I want to turn on a game and know who I'm watching. I want
Fair, yeah.
recognizable brands. I don't. Uh, these are all just to sell jerseys. I think most people understand that. Which, whatever, that's fine. That's we're talking about Major League Baseball here, so there's nothing new about trying to market and sell the game, and sell merchandise. Uh, but I just this stuff does not interest me. Players Weekend never interested me. I'm just a grump when it comes to this stuff. That said, I thought they looked fine. I don't know if I love the red because it reminds me of like spring training
Mm,
jerseys in a way. I thought where it said the Lou, I thought that kind of looked kind of cool. Um, the hats, I need to go back and look at them. In a way, I thought they were sort of cool because it reminded me. And again, I might have to go back and look at them to see because I could have this wrong, but it kind of reminded me of like the St. Louis Stars hats,
yeah, probably.
what with the STL, the way it was written,
Mhm.
but I need to go back and look at them again. But overall, I am just so not interested in City Connect stuff because I'm a grouch when it comes to this stuff.
So I think that's
Well,
how I feel about him.
that's fair. And I am one that I still don't understand who buys the the camo version, the St. Patrick's Day version, which are terrible. I rail
Uh-huh.
about that every time. Um, even the the four. I mean, all these different the Mother's Day, Father's Day ones. I don't know who's buying those. That being said, if they're going to do a City Connect, I think this one's pretty good. It's pretty.
Okay.
Um, I think for the fact that it could have been much more garish, I guess. I mean, it could have been a lot more busy. It could have been, we've seen City Connects are definitely hit and miss. Even if you accept the concept, um,
Mm-hmm.
they have been hit or miss. I think this one is very much in line with the Cardinals because it's a conservative. It is not something that's just out of the blue. They didn't do like red pants, so it doesn't look completely like pajamas or anything of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, if I like it a lot better than the powder blues, I'll tell you that much.
Have we even seen the powder blues yet this year?
No, because fanatics can't
Okay.
get them to the team. Um, it, I mean, I this is just amazing to me. I know, and I get that they have to measure and they're custom fit, whatever the
Mm-hmm.
case may be. But this is get. You would think they could be getting stuff to a team, faster than that, but they have not. In fact, I'm not 100% sure. Last I knew, I don't think they had the creams. Last I knew either. Maybe they have by now. I
I
don't know.
so as we were talking about City Connect stuff, I started thinking like, have I even seen the home Saturday jerseys? Um, and I don't think I have.
Probably haven't
That's
because at one
that's when they
time
wear
they
the
were
the cream with piping, right? Like
right,
the St. Louis
right,
on Saturdays.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Which I like that. I like that cream
oh,
look.
I was very excited. I think was that like 2013, 14 when they
Somewhere
unveiled
around there.
those. I thought they looked great. And I
Yeah.
still do like them. But the novelty's worn off just a little bit. But that's about as far
Yep.
as I want to go when it comes to alternate jerseys, I think.
Yeah. And I think the Cardinals, and we don't know exactly how they're going to use these City Connects. And to
Right.
some degree, they didn't have a choice, right? I mean, everybody's getting a City Connect. Um, but I hope the Cardinals have been pretty good about, yeah, you're wearing Saturdays on the road or at home. So you're only seeing that cream, what, you know, 13 times a year, basically, and the Blues 13 times a year. You're
Mhm.
not getting overwhelmed with them, and you know when it's going to happen. You don't have to wonder what uniform they're going to wear that night. I
And
feel
it's
like some
still
of those
bird
guys,
and it's still birds on the bat. I know it says
right?
St. Louis and Cardinals, still birds on the bat. It's not like, the St. Louis flag or, something that's just like,
Right.
wait, that's not even your logo or, or something.
Yeah.
But while we're on this subject, I think you're just watching or paying attention to the game via Game Day or,
Hmm.
or whatever app you're using. So you can't see, but the Cardinals are wearing these bizarre hats. You might know the ones I'm talking about from when they tweeted them out, or maybe
Oh,
it's old. The
the
Red Sox are
black
wearing
with the
them too.
stars and stuff.
Yes. What is happening?
Yeah.
What is
It's
happening here?
it's Memorial. I think it's like it's for. I saw somebody mentioned it. Well, Jeff Jones had it out. Let me check his tweet. But basically, I think it's. I know Memorial Day is still another week away, but I want to say like
Oh,
maybe they
they're
were doing it for both weekends. I'm not 100% sure. Let me see if I can
okay.
pull it up.
Oh, they're Memorial. Okay.
It's something
Um,
like that. Let me. No, no, that's. I'm trying to. Of course, it's Jeff Jones, so there's 800 tweets in here during during the game. I did remember seeing something that
okay.
he
Well,
had found, but
that would
it's
make
it's
sense because
something like that.
the Red Sox are wearing them too. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
all kind of equal there. All right.
it's it's
Well, I'm
definitely a league wide thing that they're doing.
I'm not going to rush out and buy that one either.
No,
I'm
no.
looking to my left right now at all my hats, and I must say the ugliest Cardinals hat I have, and I don't think I've ever worn it, but I've just felt obliged to buy it. and I think it was like on sale. But do you remember the hats the team wore after they won the World Series? The black bills, white World
Yeah,
Series champion hats. Yeah, I'm looking at
yeah, I
that
think
hat right
so.
now. I have that fitted hat staring at me right now. I've never worn it. Maybe someday I will. I don't know, but so
That
I,
is,
I I
yeah,
rail against these hats. I'll never buy one, but then there's a hat I've never worn. That is not the
yeah.
most aesthetically pleasing thing
Well,
right
yeah. If they
now in
win the
my
World
life.
Series in a
Right, then
City
we'll let
Connect,
it's
then I
yeah,
guess you'll have to
that's
buy
different.
it. Yes. So,
Yeah,
um, but yeah, I can't find that tweet now, but it's something like that. It's Armed Services Weekend or something of that nature. So, and again, yeah, I mean, it's nice. I mean, they do these things, and I get the honor of it. Mother's Day, Father's Day, all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But when you're looking at it and then you put it up for sale at the store, I mean, I guess somebody buys it, but I don't know. I can't imagine that there's enough of a market for that. But they keep doing it, so I guess there is.
There must be. And I do proceeds go to like certain causes, or is that way
Yeah.
too? Am I being
Um.
way too assuming of
No.
something like
No. In fact, I think we even mentioned that. I can't remember. Might have even asked that question to Bill DeWitt one of the years at Blogger Gay.
that? Okay.
But yeah, the Mother's Day and Father's Day ones, I know. I think all the net proceeds, the profit goes to prostate cancer and breast cancer
Oh, well, that's
places or
nice.
something of that
Okay.
nature. So I mean, at least to some degree, the league isn't making money off of those, but I still want to know who's buying them. I mean, it's like at a and again, they sell like I haven't seen it in a while. I think they've gotten away from it. They've been doing the green hats, but they've not used the green uniforms in spring training as much. But then they put those up for sale. I'm like, why would you do that? I just I don't know. I mean, it
Yeah.
boggles my mind. But
Yeah. Make
um,
better hats, and we can donate to charity more because we'll
that's
buy them.
that's right. That's right. Or maybe just donate to charity, and
Yeah. Or
don't make it
there's
tied
also that.
to what we purchase. Maybe there's that too. But anyway, anything else that you want to discuss? We've run a little bit long, but
Well,
that's
that was my
fine.
fault for thinking we needed to talk about Vince Coleman for 30 minutes.
No, that's
So,
absolutely we need to talk about Vince Coleman. I feel
well, I
like
will say
I wouldn't go ahead.
the Cardinals are up 9-5 in the eighth
Hmm.
inning, although the Red Sox have two on with two outs. But they have been manufacturing runs via the home run and also other ways throughout this game. And I think that's a promising sign. Um, it's weird. I think we've had the Red Sox number the last few years. I
Well, it's
think we
about
swept
time.
them
I'm
last.
tired. They
Didn't
keep
we?
having it in
I
October.
know. Right. Uh, because I remember even after those post seasons, I feel like we would always play them and they would kick our butts. But I think the
Yeah.
last couple of years we have done okay against the Red Sox. If not, I think we even swept them last year. I think we swept them and the Yankees. Am I making that up? Last year. Um,
Oh, last
anyway.
year, man, I don't remember sweeping many people last year. Um, but
I think we
which
swept the Yankees around this time last year, but I'll have to look at the schedule.
let's look at that.
But
Man,
anyway,
Yankees.
I don't know when we will talk next, but who knows? Maybe this will be like a springboard to a brand new Cardinals team, and we will be right in the thick of it. Nice catch. Um, very good
Hopefully
catch
soon.
by Brendan
But
Donovan
Donovan.
to get out of that inning. So anyway, what I was saying is, yeah, this could be the nice springboard to some good baseball.
I
That's what I'm
hope
hoping.
so. But I also know that that game a few weeks ago that the Cardinals tied it up in the eighth on a Goldschmidt homer and um, Gorman walked it off with a home run, and we thought that seemed like a good thing. And then they went out and got beat 14-1 the next night. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
I worry about that.
I remember tweeting last year after a win against the lowly Nationals. And I think it was like June or something. Well past the time when we knew this team was bad.
Right, right.
In fact, very bad. I think I remember tweeting after win like I don't want to jump the gun here, but this win kind of feels big or something like that. And in case you missed last year, I can tell you it was not big. Nothing changed. And in fact, the team got worse.
Well, I've got you here, and I'm feel like we've probably I'm sure we've talked about this before, but with another couple of years now under our belt, what are you thinking about this balanced schedule, where we see everybody?
So I was just thinking about this last week, actually. There's some things I like. I like the fact that, and there's mostly selfish reasons that I like. I like the fact that I can see the Cardinals in Baltimore every other year.
Fair.
Um, but living on the East Coast, that opens the door for me to see them in other ballparks that otherwise they would have only been at what every other, every
Like
what
every 6 years or so,
6 years or
like
something
that.
like that.
Yeah.
So I like that, but that's about it. Other than that, I'm not a fan. I like it's and Joe Sheehan makes this point that to call them still like the National League and the American League is kind of pointless. I mean, they're
Yeah.
conferences at this point.
Yeah.
That's what Sheehan has said, and I agree with that. I mean, there's nothing different about the leagues, and I'm not saying there has to be something different about the leagues, but I certainly enjoyed it when the leagues felt very different, where you didn't even. I mean, I don't know if I enjoyed the years when I didn't even see teams from the American League play because I was only watching National League games, and the only time I saw the American League was in the playoffs and the All Star game. There was certainly something sweet and nostalgic about that, but obviously that also meant I had way less access to watching baseball. Um, but I enjoy watching the Cardinals play the Reds, the Cubs, you know, the rivals. I
Hmm.
My comment was, if the Cardinals had stunk like this, several years ago, that would have been bad. But at least I still could have gotten excited for 19 games against the Cubs.
Right.
We're nearing the end of May. We haven't even played the Cubs yet. That
Hmm.
seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah. I mean, we play the clubs next weekend, um, with the much ballyhooed Buck Carey connection returning, which I think is pretty cool.
I did too.
Um, yeah, I think that's nice, and I'm glad they were able to do that. But I think that the Cubs. I want to say the last time the Cubs come to Bush is around the All Star break, which is wrong. And then I think the last time the Cardinals go to Wrigley is like beginning of August. I mean, you've got the last 2 months of the season without the Cubs. That's got to be better. You got to be better than that, right? And yeah, I'm not a huge fan, and I think I'm very interested to see, in a couple of years, if the idea of, oh, okay, well, last year, or 2 years ago when they played the Yankees, for the first time in a while, that was a big deal, right? The Yankees are coming to town. You never get to see the Yankees. That's a big deal. But now it's like, well, if I miss them this year, I'll just catch them in 2 years. And I
Yeah.
feel like that novelty is going to wear off really fast. Doesn't mean they're going to stop, because I think the interleague novelty has worn off quite significantly. And like you said, it just adds to this idea that there is no difference between the leagues, which I honestly think is part of baseball's plan. If you want to get conspiracy theory on me, I think that at some point in time you're going to get some sort of radical realignment that kind of ignores,
Mm.
National League and American League,
And
and
this was
just kind
sort
of
of a way
puts
to
them all
kind of
together.
ease fans into it.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we've kind of
Oh,
done that as, by piecemeal, right? I mean, at one
yeah.
time they
This.
had American League and National League presidents. They got rid of those, and then you get rid of the
Yeah.
DH, and then you get the balanced schedule. And at some point in time, I just think that it's going to either just going to like lump everybody in one big thing, or
Yeah.
you know change. In the next expansion, which is probably coming in what, 4 or 5 years, you'd think, there's going to be some sort of significant shifting, of teams, and they're not going to necessarily take into account the history of the American League or the National League.
That is not the craziest thing I've ever heard at all. Look, it's me. If it was up to me, there wouldn't even be interleague.
Exactly.
The 4 teams would make the playoffs. Um, you know, um, but I'm trying to be cautious about just being like, oh, like back when I was whatever age, this was so
Sure,
great.
sure.
But I do remember when growing up watching a lot of those unremarkable Cardinals teams in like the early '90s. Um, but still getting together with people, like still getting excited when they played the Cubs.
Hmm.
Now, part of that had to do with exactly like the proximity where I grew up, which was Central Illinois, where it was like 50-50 Cardinals Cubs fans. So it really did
Right.
feel like an event. And, you had neighbors who were Cubs fans, family members who were Cubs fans, and vice versa, so it was kind of like this, almost like a communal thing when they played. And I think that's, the idea that this was a friendly rivalry, I think a lot of it stems from that sort of feeling. Central Illinois, I've noticed when you get closer to either Chicago or St. Louis, it stops seeming as friendly.
It's fair.
um, uh, but no, I have very fond memories of those games, and so fewer Cardinals Cubs games is always a bad thing in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I always I mean, I know people got tired of seeing the Brewers and the Pirates and the Reds, all constant. It seemed like, every other week you were playing those guys. But I also felt like if you beat those teams, you knew you won the National League Central. I mean, you earned that title, right? I mean, you had a chance to control your own destiny. You had, the team that won the most was probably going to be the team that won the division, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like some of that's gone too because it's just this mesh. I know you're playing the division more than you're playing others, but it's still not what it was.
And look, I'm not saying it's like a good thing when like teams fight each other or something like that, but it also allows for things like that to happen. When teams really get
Right.
to know each other in the division,
Yeah.
it creates excitement. That those few years we had with the Reds, you can think of a few years, you like the years the Pirates were good from 2013 through 2015. Those games with the Pirates were a blast,
Hmm.
and intense. Like I feel like they were 2-1 every time. That there were so many close games we had with the Pirates. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we see them so much,
Right.
or back then we did, and I think that was very helpful to cultivating interest in the games, the individual games, and just like the overall game itself.
Yeah, because you knew you had a feeling for who the Pirates were going to bring out of the bullpen, right? And I mean, there was no other reason for you to know who the Pirates bullpen was going to be, especially when they were bad, right? But
Right.
if after you faced them, 3 times a year, you knew, hey, I don't want to see player X come out of this bullpen. If they get a lead, they're going to go to this guy, and this is going to be a problem. And I don't know that you get that with just a couple of home and homes. But you know, again, that's
And no, 100%. And like when Brandon Phillips said the thing about the Cardinals,
sure.
what made that whole thing so great is then they had to play each other.
Yeah.
Like that's why that was so
Well,
fun.
or
Yeah.
Niger Morgan, saying what he
Hmm.
did. You still
Yeah.
had, and now granted, I think he may have hit his. I can't remember if he did his before after the end of the regular season, but you ran into him in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But still, there that that lingered, right? I mean, I think and we talk about how much we hated to see Aramis Ramirez, no matter what team he was on, right? And that was part of it was because you were playing him,
Yeah. And
and it
Pedro
seemed like
Alvarez. Yeah. There's
yeah,
lots of
and he
guys like
seemed like
that.
you saw him 80 year times a year, but they, they always you always knew, hey, those guys are going to just destroy the Cardinals, and there's something to that, right? I mean, that was it goes back to the old days, even older than us days, when Musial and them were going through and they were playing everybody 16 times or something, and like a hold of everybody in the league a whole bunch. And that's why Musial got his nickname, right? Because he was in New York, and they said, "Here comes that man again," and
Hmm.
that's just because they kept seeing him all the time, and he kept destroying them. So um, you don't. I just don't feel like you get that. And I know the idea is to let the stars come through and everybody. But if you're wanting to see a pitcher, they very well may not pitch in that series. The way that people, with the way the stars are used these days, sometimes you're not going to see them, but you might see them twice. But they're probably not going to necessarily play all 3 games necessarily. And I just don't know that you get that kind of connection after, like a here and gone.
No, like there were plenty of stars in the American League when I was growing up that I never would have seen. It didn't mean I didn't know I so what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't you don't you're not obligated. You don't have the right to see every single player.
Right.
I don't know. That's I understand the reasoning behind that. That just seems silly to me. Like
Yeah. Well,
I was not owed Wade Boggs growing
right.
up.
And you got him. You got him in the middle of July when they had the All-Star game.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that was about it. But nowadays,
Yeah.
especially with MLB TV, I mean, depending on where you live, of course, um, you have a
Yeah,
chance to
there's
see
no
those
lack of
guys if you want to.
access.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
or you're watching clips on MLB Network, or I mean, you're seeing, back in the old days, the National American League didn't see people in the American League did not see Stan Musial. I mean, they barely, they probably saw clippings and a couple of hearings here and there, but until they got to the playoffs, they didn't see him. Bob Gibson the same way. Um,
Right.
and nowadays that's not the case for us. So, but they don't put us in charge of things. And
Somewhere there were two people like us when they first did the actual playoffs instead of having just the American National League and the pennant winners going straight to the World Series, and they
mhm,
had the playoffs, and that must have been such a radical adjustment for
sure,
baseball fans after they had, I mean, what, 70 years, 80 years of doing it this one way, or I don't know how many years.
yeah.
But pretty much that 70 years, I would say. And
And
then all of a
what they
sudden
split up?
this
They split them in '62, right?
is
Um,
that when they split?
I feel like the Mets came in that year. And I feel
That would
like it
make
was with that
sense. Yeah, because
expansion.
that's when the
Um,
Astros came in, the Mets came in.
yeah, I feel like it was with that expansion is when they added that extra layer of playoffs because it was getting that was getting a
Well,
little
no, that's
unwieldy.
wrong because in
Is it?
'64 the Cardinals,
Oh, it's
the
true.
Cardinals did
So
not.
was it? So was it 69? I have it. I had it in my head that it was 69, but then I'm like, well, that's just the first year the Mets won. But was it that? Was it? It
I
must have
think it
been
was
right.
60. I think it was
It had to have been
69.
because
Yeah,
68 the Cardinals played the Tigers in
yeah,
the World Series and didn't have that. So
right,
yeah,
and
I think it was
yeah.
69 when they broke that because that was the year that Seattle came into the league
Okay.
before
And
it moved over to
no, San
Milwaukee,
Diego
and
didn't
then
come until early
San
70s,
Diego
right?
was 77
Okay.
with the Blue
77.
Jays.
Okay.
Seattle, I'm trying to remember who came in with Seattle, if anybody. Surely somebody did. Um, but yeah, I mean, when you added those teams, then you start getting unwieldy with as much as that makes sense. I understand wanting to split that up, but you're right. I'm sure that at the time we would have been going, why or what's this? Back in my day, you had to win to get to the World Series, and now just anybody gets there. I'm sure that's what we would have been saying. But anyway, well, thankfully there was no podcasting back then. And if you're still with us at this point in time, you may be wishing there was no podcasting in these days. But anyway, it's always fun to have Alex on, and I'm just glad if nothing else, we'll pick this up. Maybe at some point in time, we're just going to have to, get on and not record it. Just pretend spare everybody else, but we'll have to get on and complain about the way the game is today.
I would love to.
Yeah. But and I look forward. I know that I assume you're still planning on at least joining us at the ballpark for a blogger day. So I hope to see you in 3 weeks now or so.
I will be there. I have an early morning flight on Saturday and an early morning flight on Sunday. So it's going to be a quick trip, but I will be there.
Not as quick as last year's trip though, probably. Or 2 years ago, I guess it
2
was.
years ago when I decided that morning I was going. Yeah, that is true.
Yes, that's still mind-boggling to me. I'm just not that kind of person, so I'm very glad you
Oh,
did. It was very good to see you, but
oh, I'm
uh,
not either, really. So it was kind of like it was kind of like a shock to my system as I was doing it. Like, but yeah, it was great seeing everyone.
Yeah, it was. So, all right. Like I said, I believe Alan should be back next week. I think the season's over, so we'll rope him back into his normal duties. But until then, for Alex, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Alice Sayed, the second for one, the double play. What a double play by Ozzie Smith. Oh, mercy.